Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal College Football Playoff Quarterfinal Matchup, Ohio State, Oregon. You make no mistake about it. These right now are the two best teams in the country. And that's exactly what we were saying after that first matchup in Eugene, Oregon. Like, you watch that football game and say, that was the most impressive, clean, competitive football game that you've seen all year. And you saw a lot of good ones, right? You saw Georgia, Texas. You saw Georgia, Alabama. That was the game where you watched it and said, those two teams look like the two best teams in the country. And then you look at what Ohio State just did last night against Tennessee, you kind of double down on that take. Like, for me, whoever wins this football game is going to be my pick to win the national championship. And at the end of the day, for the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about matchups. It kind of just going to come down to what players are making plays. Like, both of these rosters are two of the most talented rosters you see in the country. Which NFL dudes for what teams are going to be making the plays to win that game? This is kind of, to me, what it comes down to. To me, it's probably going to be the best football game we see all year. I'm extremely excited for this one. Before we get into some of the matchups, just want to say thank you to you guys, Ohio State fans, Oregon fans, college football fans in general, Big Ten fans. Good luck for the Big Ten Conference. And we don't really claim Indiana, but Ohio State, Penn State looked phenomenal yesterday. This Big Ten Conference is legit. They're all threats in the college football playoffs. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, I want to start with this Oregon offense versus this Ohio State defense. We all know how good Ohio State can be on defense, and they showed it last night against Tennessee. When you're looking at this matchup, Dylan Gabriel and this Oregon Ducks offense versus an Ohio State defense that we just continue to bang the table for. It is NFL guys at all three levels. It's pretty much just all NFL guys on one defense. When you're looking at this matchup, where you want to start this conversation?
I mean, it's going to start with that offensive line of Oregon, probably dealing with that defensive line of Ohio State that they handled in that first game. That was probably the fundamental difference in that game, and why I think Oregon was able to be so successful on offense was that defensive line for Ohio State just didn't get anything going. What was it? 0 sacks, 2 tackles for a loss. Like, that's not nearly good enough. I look at how good the players are individually on that unit, arguably two of the best defensive tackles in the country. JTT and Jack Sawyer, when they're playing and they're on, they're a problem. And they were a huge problem last night. I thought both of them were very dominant. Now, I think Oregon's offensive line is a much better pass protecting unit than Tennessee. And that is obviously what kind of bore out in the first matchup. But that, to me, is where it starts. And honestly, I look at how they rotated a little bit more for Ohio State in that defensive line. Had Kenyatta Jackson going a little more, had Bo Melton going. I wonder if that was something that kept them a little bit fresher and allowed them to play fast.
I wonder how much they rotate against Oregon, because I think you rotate that much against Tennessee because they play with so much pace and you're playing so many plays a game. You want to keep your guys fresh. That's where it starts for me too. You can talk about all the skill talent for Oregon. You can talk about Dylan Gabriel. For me, it's Josh Connerly, Johnny Cornelius against Jack Sawyer and JTT. Like, who wins that's a popcorn matchup. Like, all of those guys will be playing on Sundays next year. That's where this game, to me, gets decided for this matchup. You're kind of right. When we talked about this game, when it happened in Eugene, you kind of said Oregon's offensive line kind of won that battle. 0 sacks, only 2 tackles for loss. You fast forward to what they just did against Tennessee, 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. What front wins the matchup is probably where you want to start. The second matchup I'm looking for, and kind of from a schematics approach, what's Ohio State's game plan in the secondary? You go back to the first matchup, it was, hey, we're going to do everything we can to take away Tez Johnson, because everything leading up into that football game was that's DG's favorite target. And it still is that going into this game. But when they tried to take away Tez Johnson and they left Evan Stewart alone on the boundary in some one-on-one matchups, Evan Stewart was able to make some plays to fundamentally win that football game for Oregon. Does Ohio State take that same approach going into this game? Or are they a little bit more balanced? And then if they do take that approach, can Evan Stewart again come up with some big plays on the boundary against a guy like Denzel Burke to win this football game for Oregon?
Now, that's why I think the defensive line needs to play well, because frankly, they were able to take that approach against Tennessee because they did give up some completions. They didn't give up a whole lot of yards after the catch, which is obviously a huge part of playing a little bit more of a softer coverage scheme, if you will, that Ohio State was playing. Their safeties were back a little bit more. Their corners were back a little bit more. But they were also creating a lot of negative plays. So you can give up a play on the underneath kind of zone, if you will, if you're going to go create a negative play, get a sack, get a TFL, those type of plays, because then you can really keep teams from just marching on you consistently. Now, obviously, against Oregon, they couldn't create negative plays, so you almost have to kind of squeeze down and try to take away any sort of yardage. That, to me, is why the defensive line playing a good game and being able to be disruptive is so important to kind of.
I would add front seven, and I would first talk about the run game. Like, I think why Ohio State was able to leave their two safeties high all game is, hey, we're going to light box you. We're not going to bring a safety into the box to stop the run. We're going to give you numbers in the box, but we're confident our front seven, essentially front six, can stop that run game. Ohio State was able to do that. Like, can Oregon get something going on the ground? And that's what makes Oregon's offense so special and so dynamic, is they can do that. Like, if you want to give them numbers in the box, you think, oh, a former Pac-12 team, they just want to throw the ball around the yard. No, that's an offensive line that can road grade behind a running back with Jordan James who can really get downhill. Can Oregon get something going in the run game to force Ohio State to kind of put some more bodies in the box and then kind of open up some opportunities for a guy like Evan Stewart to get down the field? That's probably what I'm looking at. And yards after the catch, you kind of mentioned it. Ohio State did give Tennessee some stuff underneath. That's Oregon's game. They want to go to the quick game and get it to Tez Johnson and let him do the rest. Ohio State did a really nice job firing downhill and making tackles in space. You're going to need to do that against Oregon. Like, if there's one key to stopping this Oregon offense, it is tackling their playmakers in space. Ohio State did a very good job of it against Tennessee. Now can they do a good job of it against Oregon is probably the question you're looking at. Let's flip the sides here, and let's talk about Ohio State's offense versus this Oregon defense. And we just talked about where it starts for the opposite match. It probably starts on the line of scrimmage again for this matchup as well. One of the bigger surprises for me is Ohio State's offensive line probably won that matchup against Tennessee last night. That's a very good Tennessee defensive line. We have all these question marks about Ohio State's offensive line because of the injuries that they've had to go through. My first takeaway, Donovan Jackson out there at left tackle is looking more and more comfortable, which is a massive storyline. He's an All-American guard that has to kick out the tackle because of the injuries. He's looking better and better as the year goes on. I remember he struggled against Abdul Carter at times, although everybody struggles against Abdul Carter. Looked very good against some very good edge rushers against Tennessee. Outside of Tegra Shabola having some tough reps, I thought Ohio State's offensive line did very well.
See, my thinking is I think they play well, and I think if they get help from the offensive scheme, I think they can be fine.
That's probably where it starts.
Look, that is still the unit I have the biggest question mark on this
whole
field. Like, I look in this game, like, there are still some moments where Tennessee was winning one-on-one battles that, again, just is going to happen because I don't think with the injuries and with the lack of depth, like, that is just what it is right now for Ohio State. But they have so many weapons on the boundary. And Will Howard, he's really dynamic when they don't just – play the way they played against Michigan. There's a lot they can do, I think, to help that offensive line. They did it for most part of the year. I thought they did it against teams like Penn State. They didn't do it at all against Michigan, which I found stunning. I think a lot of Ohio State fans stunning. But that offense, when they're getting the ball to the perimeter, they're getting the ball out of his hand quickly. They're being creative in their run schemes, using kind of some options and some other sort of something outside of just inside zones kind of. That's a really tough offense to stop.
So they went to the perimeter, and that was clearly a area of focus for Ohio State's offense. Whether it's running or whether it's getting it out to the flat, can Oregon take that away? And what's kind of interesting is Oregon struggled with that type of concept against Penn State a couple of weeks ago. So I'm guessing Ohio State will go to that as well. And you said it best, that goes a long way in terms of taking some pressure off your offensive line and also leaning into your best plays. I think fundamentally what was so frustrating about Ohio State's game plan going into the game against Michigan is you were running your offense playing right into the strength of that Michigan defense, which is the inside of the defensive line, guys like Kenneth Graham, Mason Graham. And then you're not getting the ball to your best players on the football field, guys like Emeka and Jeremiah Smith on the outside. And so if you're Ohio State going into this matchup, do you want to go right at Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon, or do you want to try to go to the perimeter? And one thing that makes that difficult is Oregon's team speed is very, very good. Like, they can fly around the football field, but you kind of get the sense Ohio State will try to do that against Oregon as well.
Because you said it, like the linebackers for Oregon, that'll be the unit I'm looking for. They need to be sharper because I didn't think that was a good game at all against Penn State.
Agreed.
I didn't think they were fitting runs on the inside well. I didn't think they were covering the sideline to sideline particularly well. They just looked like they were getting confused by that Penn State's attack, that a fair amount of it was going out to the boundary, and they just didn't play it very well. Like, that'll be probably what I'm looking for is what do these linebackers do? Because frankly, I thought Ohio State did a really good job getting after the Tennessee linebackers.
Yeah, it might be. I wonder if it's a little bit of an like we all talk about how the bye for a team like Oregon's not great because you're playing Ohio State, the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee, and Texas. You have to play week 1, but now you're playing a team like Arizona State. This is where that bye week might be a little bit important, where it's like you get to see Ohio State. That was the best version of Ohio State, and they're probably going to try to replicate that in 10 days. You saw all of their good stuff on the film. And now you can kind of get in for the next couple of days and say, all right, how do we address what Ohio State wants to do? That was the best version of Ohio State we've seen all year. They're going to try to replicate it in a week and a half. Can we try to take some of that away? Will Howard in the run game was kind of a non-factor in the first game against Oregon, which was weird because we thought it would be. Like, you knew Will Howard wasn't going to run the football against a bunch of teams you felt comfortable in beating. But when you play a team like Oregon, you kind of felt like they tried to use Will Howard in his legs. They didn't really in the first matchup. They went to it a little bit against Tennessee. Do you see something like that pop up? I think the last part for me, I got two more things. One, red zone. Ohio State was like, why did that game turn into a blowout, a non-competitive football game? Ohio State didn't kick field goals. They kicked one field goal at the end of the half. It was like a 60-yarder. They missed it. But outside of that, Ohio State not only moved the football, but they kind of put you away with scoring touchdowns, which is, again, something Ohio State did not do against Michigan a couple of weeks ago. Like, they let Michigan hang around because they were turning the football over and kicking field goals. Scoring touchdowns in this football game is going to be a priority. Like, both of these offenses have so much talent. You feel like they're going to move the football. What team operates inside the 20 better is probably going to be a large determiner in terms of this outcome. And I think the second thing is we talked about negative plays. It never seemed like Ohio State was uncomfortable on offense. And I think it started with Tennessee was they weren't very capable of getting Ohio State behind the chains. And the whole playbook for Coach Kelly and Will Howard was open. You weren't in these 3rd and 9 situations where you have a limited playbook. Oregon's pinning your ears back. Can Oregon force Ohio State into some of those 3rd and longs like Michigan was able to do? That's not where Will Howard wants to operate. And you got to try to make him uncomfortable as a quarterback. That's probably the last key to the game I'm looking at in this matchup here.
That's easier said than done when Ohio State's playing like that more dynamic style in terms of getting guys out to the boundary, because they did give him a lot of easy plays, a lot of stuff to the flat, like not sitting in the pocket, giving himself chances, take sacks. Like, man, that's kind of how I see this game getting out of hand, is if this gets into like
there's no way this game gets out of hand. I can't see that.
I wouldn't think so. But again, it's like the issue is you've seen Ohio State go to some things on offense and just not like, again, when they're like that Penn State game, I was like, ooh, this is an offense that I think even with their maybe deficiencies on the offensive line, that can be very successful. And you saw it again against Tennessee where they're utilizing all their playmakers. Jeremiah Smith's touching the ball a lot. Like, those guys, they need the ball in their hands pretty consistently. But again, you've seen Ohio State go away from it. I don't think they do it again against Oregon, but that to me is how it does, because Oregon's defensive line, I do think, is probably the biggest mismatch on this field against Ohio State's O-line.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. And it's like it comes down to that conversation where it's like, just simplify the sport. Like, where are your best players? They're on the perimeter. Get them the football.
That's what makes the Michigan game so frustrating, because you kind of knew that was the case against Michigan, and it somehow –
it was vice versa. They were like, okay, we're not going to use our best players on the football field. We're going to run it at your best players on the football field and see what happens. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Let's get into the pick. Dale, I love the line. Like, 1 point just to pick them. Ohio State, Oregon. Who you got here?
I think I got to go Ohio State.
I
look at the danger of what they just did, and –
yeah.
Again, when they're getting the ball out of Will Howard's hand, it's just really hard to deal. Like, their guys on the boundary are just tough matchups one-on-one. And when they're running the ball the way they were running it, getting into the perimeter, utilizing their backs out of the backfield, they just feel really tough to stop. I'd like to think that they can get to that style of offense again. In that case, I think they put themselves in a really good position. But again, we have seen them go away from it. So I'll go Ohio State.
I get it. And I totally get the pick because Ohio State last night just looked like the best team in the country. Dan Lanning, big games. Ryan Day, big games. I trust Dan Lanning right now. Like this team to me plays better when the moment's the brightest. And so I'm going to take Oregon in this football game. It's going to be extremely close. It's going to come down to players making plays. Oregon's been the team to make those plays this year. So I'm going to take Oregon. Going to be such a good football game. Fired up for it. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.